right. Okay, everybody. We are live. Ethan, you want to turn the volume off on your phone? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, doing it right now. There we go.
All right, perfect.
Technology.
Look at this.
Woo!
You wouldn't think that there were so many things to get wrong in a live stream, but we've managed to do it. Erin Petrey.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Of course. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so for all the folks who are joining us on Instagram Live, we're here for a 4 bourbon tasting. We don't have to wait till September to drink bourbon.
That is correct, even though September is National Bourbon Heritage Month. So
we're kind of we're making up for 2020 and all the terrible things that we lost time on there. So we're getting started nice and early here in 2021. Erin, why don't you kick us off by introducing yourself and
Sure.
just telling our listeners and our viewers a little bit about who you are and how you came to become a bourbon evangelist.
yeah, sure. No, so I actually even wore the shirt, my Bourbon Evangelist shirt. Some people might recognize this very common bottle. But so, no, my name's Erin Petrey. I actually grew up in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, down the road from the Four Roses Distillery. And on the other side of the county, 10,000 person county, let's be real, from Wild Turkey. Went to school in Lexington, but, I've always had an affinity for bourbon, probably because I literally passed the Four Roses Distillery twice a day for every day, 17 years of my life. So, the mash in the morning is what I really like to smell. So I am a senior contributor for bourbonbanter.com. I've been with them for 8 years this August. I am the president-elect of the Kentucky Society of Washington, and then I also teach cocktail classes, but I do love bourbon, and really the way that I got into this is I drank a lot, and then I asked our editor. I submitted myself for consideration to be one of the first writers besides our editor, and here we are 8 years later. So
That is awesome. I love the smell of mash in the morning. The closest I have ever come to that is I worked at a law firm, and they had their marketing office in the basement of this building, and it was the building right next to Espita.
Yep.
And so we smelled them making their tortillas in the morning, which was it's a different thing, but corn both times.
Yeah, it is also definitely corn based. So
So I don't have the mash in the morning. Well, that's awesome. Can you explain to our listeners and our viewers the logic behind what we have set up for us here, and maybe just give us a brief 30,000-foot overview of the bottles?
yeah, absolutely. So to pull it back a little bit, a lot of folks who are listening in probably know what bourbon is, but just to kind of lay that out, bourbon has to be made in the United States, at least 51% corn in the mash bill, and then the other parts of that mash bill could be malted barley, rye, or wheat. Most commonly, it is just malted barley and rye. So there are a couple of different permutations you can get from a mash bill. There's other ways, other things that actually go into making a bourbon, because that's actually dictated by U.S. federal law. We can get into that later. But what I really wanted to highlight with today's tasting is the 3 different mash bills, the way that you can really get to a different flavor by the type of grains that go into it. And then I threw in a wild card at the end for an ultra-aged bourbon. So we're first starting out with Elijah Craig, which comes from the Heaven Hill Distillery, and that has your pretty standard, corn, a little bit of rye, a little bit of malted barley in it. Then we go over to the Four Roses Single Barrel, which is a high rye mash bill. There's really no definition for what high rye means. A lot of people think it's over 15 or 18%, but we're going to get pretty deep into rye with that. Our third one is going to be, now it is rebranded as Rebel Bourbon, probably way too long coming, let's be real, but this particular bottle was purchased when it was still Rebel Yell, and that is a wheated bourbon. Other wheated bourbons you might know are also things like Maker's Mark. And then finally, we have the Wild Turkey Bottled in Bond, 17-year. That's also going to be your traditional mash bill, but this one has been aged for 17 years. So I wanted to show kind of how that ultra aging can impact the flavor.
I like that. We've got bookending with traditional mash bills.
Yep.
And then we've got the high rye, and then the sort of light wheated is almost like our palate cleanser. So
yeah,
this is a really nice, very thoughtfully set up lineup. I am a huge fan of Elijah Craig. It's sort of my go-to sipper. I don't tend to mix with it. It's kind of like where I start not mixing.
I mean, that's fair. I really love Elijah Craig, and I mean, I love Heaven Hill. I'm such like a Heaven Hill fangirl. I love almost everything they do. It's funny, when I was not of legal drinking age, the first handle of bourbon I ever killed with my best friend from high school was Evan Williams Black Label. So I guess, I started that out early. But, I really love everything from the Heaven Hill Distillery. I will say, though, that I do make cocktails with Elijah Craig fairly frequently. It is that 94 proof, and I like to do cocktails between that 90 to 100 proof in bourbon. So I do like to use that for cocktails, but I'll also drink it on the rocks. I'm also particularly fond of their barrel proof selections too.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
Yeah.
So we also have joining us in the booth, and in actually a quasi booth like setup for the first time, Modern Bar Cart co-founder Ethan Hall. Ethan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm learning how to be the best listener I can be and not drop the ball on the stream. Y'all are doing great. Our IG Live people are going to complain that you're a little bit fuzzy, Kaz, but we'll work on getting you a new phone.
Okay. That's too bad. Go to Facebook or YouTube if you'd like the high-res HD audio. If you go there, you'll probably hear an awesome ambulance going by right now.
It's helicopters at my house, so.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, Ethan, we are, just FYI, getting a little bit of echo in here, so I'm not quite sure if that's coming from my phone or from somewhere else, but...
Yeah, and if anybody is watching from my Instagram as well, you can also go to Modern Bar Cart on their Instagram Live or their Facebook Live or YouTube Live or whatever Twitch is. I feel old because I don't know. Yeah,
it's where video game kids go. So... Yeah, let's jump in here, and I guess we should start with the beginning. Elijah Craig.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to give folks a little bit of context too about how I'm going to be talking about some of the flavor profiles in these. If you go to bourbonbanter.com in our shop, we also have downloadable flavor wheels as well as tasting mats. We have a 3 whiskey tasting mat. We also have a 4 whiskey tasting mat, but because, it's 2021 and I'm a millennial, I don't own a printer. So I had these ones already printed out. So we're going to be scrawling on the back. But you can download those and use for your own bourbon tastings. And really the bourbon flavor wheel is really great because it really helps you mentally drive to tasting notes, because a lot of people say like, well, how do you get sawdust or grass or coriander or fig or the much maligned marzipan out of also we have a shirt that says marzipan AF on it, so love that one. But so the way to really start understanding and developing how to pull out those potentially more esoteric tasting notes is to use a baseline like this flavor wheel. There are 5 major flavor categories or families when you're tasting bourbon. You've got your wood, obviously from the barrel, from the charred oak, from the vanillins, the caramels that go in to that. The grain, obviously what's coming from your mash bill. Your sweeter aromatics, so that's going to be more like those maple syrups. Again, some of that caramel, honey, and then also moving into kind of those darker notes of chocolate mocha. Then you'll go into your spice. A lot of the spice is pulled from rye in the mash bill. So you're usually going to get more of those spice notes when you have a higher rye mash bill, but they're also still present in ones with lower rye content. So those are everything from your minty to your baking spices, anisette. And then finally is your fruit and your floral notes. So, I actually have had bourbons that taste like banana. You more often will probably hear stone fruits, apples, that sort of thing. So those are the 5 kind of categories. And so that's where you can start looking in and pinpointing those more specific tasting notes.
That's awesome. Have you done this before?
Yeah, I never. I'm just kind of like, just kind of figuring it out this time.
That was the most succinct and specific explanation of bourbon flavor categories I think I've ever heard. So, everybody, it's been tough during the pandemic, and everyone's trying to make money the way that you can. So if you want to support me, you can find me on OnlyFans pouring bourbon on my feet at much maligned marzipan. So yeah. If you want to see something like that, that's where you got to go.
TM pending.
All right. So should we?
We should.
Yeah.
I will say though that my bourbon bunker. Oh, we're starting that way. So left to right. Yeah. So we have these bottles here. This is the order, so you guys can see them, and then it's also this way for us too. And I will say that my bourbon bunker has taken a real hit during the pandemic, but I've also done a good job of keeping the stocks up. Thank God for the direct-to-consumer market, as well as places like Sealbox, who can just ship anything they want.
Yeah,
and DC
right.
for being the wild, wild west of the liquor world.
Yeah, DC,
Cheers.
We're doing just fine. I love when you walk up to a spirit and it's like an old friend.
Yeah.
It's just such a familiar aroma.
Old friend or old enemy? Frenemy, maybe?
Not in this case.
Not in this case, no. There are some like that for me.
Mm-hmm. So what traditionally do you get when you nose Elijah Craig?
Yeah, so, honestly, the first thing I get is really a lot of that kind of like fruit, more on the stone fruit side, like an apricot, if you will. Less a dried version, more as a fresh version. And I will say, as a tip, when you do nose any sort of spirit in general, but especially, with whiskeys, because that's my bread and butter, it's always good to roll between your two nostrils, because you will have a dominant nostril at any given time in the day. In order to get that full bouquet from the chimney out of the Glencairn, you're really going to want to make sure that you roll it between your nostrils.
Yes, and you can also find me sniffing bourbon at Dominant Nostril on OnlyFans. So
I'm like building out your entire brand here for free. I'm gonna have to charge royalties here.
Lovely. So I get a lot of I get brown sugar on the nose.
Absolutely.
So I get sent back. I do like the stone fruit. I like maybe a nice ripe but somewhat acidic plum in a baked format where you have like a brown sugar plum pudding, or like a plum crumble, or like a brown sugar crumble on top of something.
Now I need to like make a plum crumble, because that sounds very nice.
Yeah, it's a very Elijah Craig to me is very comforting.
Yeah. Well, it also has those kind of more caramel vanilla notes that are common in every bourbon. And that's, those kind of warm spices, those warm notes are going to kind of give you that hug, if you will. And then when you drink it, you also get that Kentucky hug, which is that, the proof coming in. And I will say, so Elijah Craig is 94 proof. That is actually going to be the lowest proof of any of the ones that we're tasting today. The rest of them are all 100 proof.
94 proof. So, and to me, it feels pretty close to that. So 90 proof is 45. So 94 is going to be 47%. So it's definitely got a bit more of a bite than something like a Maker's Mark, like a regular standard Maker's Mark, for sure.
Well, yeah, because that's 90 proof, but that's also a wheated, right? So it's going to be softer on the palate.
Yep.
On the flavor, I get a lot of the, I don't know if anybody has ever had a Majeska. They're a candy that was created in Louisville. It was named after, I believe, like some sort of like Polish opera singer or something. I'm going to get the specifics of that wrong.
Was it spelled like M-A?
M-O-D-J-E-S-K-A.
Oh, I was thinking.
Majeska.
Yeah, okay. I'm half Polish, and so yeah, the spelling usually gets pretty funky.
Yeah, well, listen, we're Kentuckians. We might have screwed it up at some point. Who knows? But a Majeska is, I think, probably one of the most perfect candies out there, because it's marshmallow in the middle and then it's caramel on the outside. So I get that a lot on the flavor here. It's a little bit of that marshmallow kind of sweetness and fluff, but then also the lighter caramel, but more of a buttery caramel.
Yeah, I like, one of the things that I like about Elijah Craig is the oak profile. I think that it actually really showcases the fact that, like, I know that this sounds really strange and kind of basic to point out, but this showcases the fact that a barrel was made out of oak and then set on fire. I can taste some of the fire in it, and not in a way that not in a way that tastes like charred or sooty, but like there's some fire here. There's nuances of fire.
Well, and and that's that's certainly intentional too, because so the story goes that Reverend Elijah Craig, who was a converted Baptist minister, he had a fire in his barn where all of his barrels were, and they accidentally got set on fire. But he needed to send that whiskey down to New Orleans anyways, and they were like, "This is great." That's honestly I'm going to call BS on that one, because people have been toasting barrels for a long time, because, it's better for to close any seams. People knew that it gave it flavor. And then also just from a cleaning perspective too, like if there was if you had crackers in your barrel before and you wanted to put whiskey in it, you just throw some fire in there and it cleans it out, if you will. So.
It's a nice story, though. You know,
It's a nice story. And if you go to Heaven Hill, their distillery is in Bardstown, Kentucky, actually right across the street from the Willett Distillery. They have a beautiful video that's very well produced that like shows the whole story. But I feel like it's a bit, when it comes to history, it's a bit apocryphal. So it's not real.
Yeah, we tend here in the U.S. though. I think we embrace that because our history is so much shorter that I think we feel like we need to make up for a little bit of lost time.
Yeah, it's true. We have a rich history though too. It's funny though about Elijah Craig. So Elijah Craig himself was actually from Scott County, Kentucky, which is next to Lexington. So it's Georgetown, Kentucky. And the guys at Blue Run Bourbon actually grew up from Elijah Craig's homestead, and so they named it after his homestead, Blue Run. So, so the mythology around Elijah Craig the person is very deep and long. So.
Yeah, chances are if it's brown in a bottle and named after an old white guy, it's bourbon.
Yeah, that's true. But the nice thing about Elijah Craig, the last thing I'll say is that, as far as age statements go, it does not hold an age statement. Sometimes if you do get a store pick, there will be an age statement on there, anywhere from 8 to 12 years. But in general, Elijah Craig off the shelf 94 proof is going to be a blend of bourbons from 8 to 12 years. Mm-hmm. They discontinued the 12-year product, at least a decade ago now, I feel like. It was a while ago because, I feel like it was maybe, I don't know. It's also the fact that now the 80s or 40 years ago weirds me out. 1980. So, time is relative, especially after 2020.
That is fair.
But they also have the barrel proof variety. They have a new toasted barrel variety, which I have not had yet. They also have a rye now. And then they have an 18 and a 23 release. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, this one's been around since the mid 80s, I think. Right before I was born, so 1986.
So I like as well the fact that when I drink Elijah Craig, I tend to take more time between my sips because I get a nice, almost like a taffy finish. It's like a little bit saline to me. Yeah. And to me that's appealing because you have this interesting tension when you have a finish like that. I find there's a little bit of delight in it because it's also a good texture. I find that it's got a bit of a buttery texture on it as well.
Sure.
And so I sit there enjoying the texture, and I enjoy salty foods anyway. I'm much more of a salty person than a sweet person.
I'm a salt fiend, so yeah.
But then the fact that it's salty makes you kind of want to go back for more. Mm-hmm. So there's this like fun little tension in the glass, and you don't find that with everything.
No, you don't, and that's also like why I know I'm not really getting into cocktails, but like when you add like a pinch of salt into a cocktail, it can completely it elevates the experience and enhances all of those flavors so much. It doesn't just make it salty, right? And so having that salinity is certainly something that makes your mouth water a little more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ethan, do we have any questions from folks?
I could make up some questions, but we don't. I will ask, do you guys get creme brulee top?
Yeah, so creme brulee topping, right, what is creme brulee topping? It's fired sugar. Mm-hmm. Right? Which is, a type of caramel, which is also what, they're doing to the barrels. So the barrels are toasted, and so those natural sugars in the wood, those natural wood sugars are going to get toasted. So very literally, there is a type of creme brulee sugar, if you will, as part of the ingredients of really every bourbon. So I really like that you kind of pointed that out because creme brulee is one of my absolute favorite things. And, who doesn't love torching something? So yeah, absolutely. That's going to be, that's also a nice way, when I go back to saying, if you're trying to pinpoint better ways to really articulate, different flavor profiles or different tasting notes, start thinking of correlations, right? So you think, okay, it tastes like burnt sugar. What is burnt sugar? Oh yeah, no, it goes back to creme brulee. And especially because there is a little bit of that body to it as well, because when you eat creme brulee, you're not just eating the sugar topping, right? Mm-hmm. You're also eating that custardiness, which also has vanilla bean in it, right? So it then saying creme brulee topping kind of pulls all of those things in together, mm-hmm. and it makes you sound fancy.
Mm-hmm. I think tasting notes are actually really important in that a lot of people tend to oversimplify them, and when I think there's another impulse if you are somebody who maybe is just starting out on your journey and you don't necessarily get some of these notes, you can be like, oh my God, how pretentious is this person talking about creme brulee? It tastes like bourbon. It doesn't taste like creme brulee. But I think you can get to a point once you develop a basic sort of I guess fluency with it, to where you can actually start making them useful again, but still specific and not pretentious in a way.
In taste also, it's very personal and it brings you to different places, and it's very much rooted in memory, right? The one that I love to talk about a lot is that Derek Brown uses all the time. He's like, somebody I know said that this tastes like Japanese milk candy. And he's like, what the heck is that? And then he tasted Japanese milk candy like years later, and he was like, oh my gosh, it does taste like that. And so, it can be very evocative of various memories that you have. And so also don't feel like you're going to be wrong if you say something. Everyone's palates are different. So someone who picks up on fig, that doesn't, and the other person or even the brand notes don't say fig, it doesn't mean that's wrong. That's how your palate processes that, and that's perfectly fine. And that's why something like a flavor wheel is really it's a great tool for experts to neophytes, and throughout that gamut. So don't ever feel shy about that. Except I will say one thing: the absolute worst tasting note you could ever give to something is the word smooth. Because it means nothing. It just means it doesn't taste like gasoline. And if it tastes like gasoline, don't drink it.
Yeah, and so for anybody who agrees with that or is curious to learn more, go in and look up our audio essay episode, The Death of Smooth.
Oh, I need to listen to that because I hate it so much.
You actually might enjoy it a lot. I had a lot of fun putting that one together. So you and I are actually very well aligned with that coming into this tasting.
It's like calling something interesting. It's like, okay, it sparks interest. Great.
Exactly.
It's a lack of specifics. So anyways.
So Elijah Craig,
yes.
we know it, we love it. I think it's time to turn our attention to the next bottle on our tasting, which is Four Roses Single Barrel.
Yeah, and so Four Roses Single Barrel. So Four Roses has 4 major types in their lineup. So they have the Four Roses Yellow Label, also rebranded recently as just Four Roses. They have the small batch, and then they have the single barrel. And then the only reason I say 4 is because the 4th one is going to be your store picks. Right? So any sort of private picks. So Four Roses has 2 different mash bills and 5 different yeast strains. So they make essentially 10 different recipes. And so your single barrel off the shelf is going to be that first strain. So it's going to be their first mash bill, which is mash bill B, I believe. Yeah, mash bill B. So that's 60% corn, 35% rye, 5% malted barley. And then from there, there's so many different other permutations between that and the yeast. And then also every single store pick for Four Roses has an age statement on it, and it will have that recipe. So there are diehard people out there who are like, I am OESK, I am OBSQ.
Oh my goodness, that sounds like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs type thing.
It does sound like Myers-Briggs, I know. But this is a 7 to 9 year. The single barrel will be anywhere from 7 to 9 years. They pull it when it fits that flavor profile, right?
Interesting that we started off with something that's 8 to 12, and now we're going slightly down in age,
but higher in proof. And then also because it's a single barrel, that means it, you're going to get sometimes a little bit of a different details on it each time. So when you look for single barrels in the store, you're always going to get generally the same overall experience, but there will be differences because they are single barrels. Right. So for example, I know some people who really don't like Henry McKenna, for example, which is out of Heaven Hill. It's a bottled and bond product, so it's 100 proof. And it's a single barrel product, but some people are like, oh, the last Henry McKenna I got was garbage. This one I got today is amazing. So it sometimes can be a crapshoot when it is single barrels. So,
yeah, and that's that has a lot to do with, if we're looking at the process and saying, all right, well, it's the same recipe. How come this same recipe in a different barrel tastes different? Well, a lot of that comes down to the fact that, well, these barrels kind of get moved around the rick house, and so maybe one's sitting sort of lower where it stays cooler, and then maybe one sitting maybe a little higher where the heat is allowed to aggregate, and then during the summer it gets a little hotter. And then, the nice thing about that is that it's a very human process. There are literal human beings who are sitting there testing these, using their senses to test these barrels. And sometimes, you're going to come across that bottle where you're maybe less impressed by it. But to me, that makes the remarkable bottles even more special.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so one thing I will say about rotating barrels and rick houses, so not all of them will do that, right? So there's some distilleries, there's fewer ones that actually move them around. A lot of times what will happen is they will stick a barrel in a rick house, and that's where it will live. And they will taste it. And so that's why tasters, blenders go in, and they are literally thieving from the barrel. So they take this big copper siphon, pop it in there, and they're just tasting whiskey all the time. Yeah, it's awesome.
It's literally what you do when you're a kid and you get the straw in your soft drink and you put your finger on top and you pull it out. It's just that, but giant.
And bespoke and made of copper, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the exact same thing, right? It's a siphon. And so that's why taste is so important. And that's why the role of the master distiller, master blender. So, people like Jackie Zykan, for example, the master blender at Old Forester, right? She has her job because she has an exceptional palate. Anybody can, with a basic understanding of chemistry or a chemistry degree can distill something, but really understanding and appreciating those flavor profiles and understanding how to blend them together, that's really where that next level comes in, and that's where it becomes a true art rather than just a science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the funny thing is, it is science at the end of the day. It's all molecules, but the art is that humans are imperfect, and so if we can manage to take those molecules and arrange them in a way that somehow makes people very happy, then that is both science but also a bit of a miracle.
Yep. And so for this one, on the nose, what is characteristic about the B mash bill and the this particular yeast strain is that it has more fruit. It's a little bit of delicate fruit forward, but I also get a lot of nuts on it as well. So for me, I kind of get that non-salty trail mix.
Fair. Ooh, I like that non-salty trail mix.
So I feel like half the time it's well, there are chocolate chips in it. No chocolate chips. I'm just saying some pistachios, maybe some hazelnuts, some pecans, cashews, and then throw in some dried cherries and cranberries, maybe some pumpkin seeds, who knows. But that's really kind of what I get out of this.
I see where you're going with the more delicate fruit. I almost get an unripe apple skin smell to it.
Well, a lot of times people will say, oh, that tastes like blackberry jam or fig jam or something jam. And really when you say jam or jelly, what that means is that it has been heated and the sugars have caramelized some and they're softened but also deepened. So then when we're talking about fruit, there's always this kind of spectrum and continuum of, yes, you have your unripe apples. You also have your apples that are more like the mealy Macintosh versus the tart Granny Smith versus a Honey Crisp apple. And then if you did, apple slices with lemon, or you did a apple stewed in butter and caramel, or if you did an apple pie, those are additives of things like butter and spices, and then even kind of that flaky pastry if you have an apple pie. But then if you have apple butter, for example, that's a totally different experience as well. And so that's why I really like to implore people to really just kind of go back in their memories and be like, all right, I know what this tastes like. What does it taste like to me? Like Ethan was saying, creme brulee, sometimes, that Japanese milk candy, saltwater taffy. These are all evocative of experiences too, and things that you've eaten. So, yeah.
I like the fact that this is high rye and you do actually get some of the rye notes on the nose, not just on the palate. Sometimes when I walk up to a high rye bourbon, it wants to walk and talk like a non-high rye bourbon on the nose, and then the rye comes in and kind of slams you on the palate. Here, I get those almost minty qualities of the rye, or more, maybe just south of mint. Maybe we're talking more of like a caraway.
Sure. Well, it's funny. So when you talk about rye as well, so rye will always give you that kind of spicy notes, right? That's the number one characteristic of rye, whether it's a rye whiskey or rye in a bourbon mash bill. But it's so funny. the silliest and probably most oddball tasting note I've ever gotten on rye whiskey itself is dill. And that's really characteristic of a lot of ryes that come out of MGP. And so even though I do love dill pickles, so that would be wonderful in like a Bloody Mary, for example.
Yep.
That would be banging.
A Bloody Bardstown or wherever MGP is
Yeah,
based.
some people. Yeah. Oh, well, that's
Indiana.
in Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
Indiana, right.
Yeah, and then funny because that's a great segue because MGP just purchased Luxco, which makes Rebel Bourbon. So.
And for anybody who wonders what MGP stands for, it's a Midwest grain product, but it used to be called something different.
I don't know.
Oh, Seagram's.
Oh, yeah. No. I'm sorry. So I was like, where are you going with that? So Seagram's actually, it's funny because Seagram's and Four Roses together, that is also a connection. So Seagram's owned Four Roses for a really long time. And then Seagram's decided to really stop production on the Four Roses line and focus on their blended whiskey. So like I said, I did grow up down the road from Four Roses. So I saw the changes in the signs where it said Seagram's and then it went down and there was no sign for a while. And then it went back up as Four Roses. And so I remember like the hordes of like Japanese businessmen who actually would come in and after the acquisition by Kirin, so it's owned by Kirin now. And so it was just funny to watch all of that firsthand, especially the expansion of the distillery and the visitor center, because the Four Roses distillery, as it is today, that original building was built in 1910, and then they've gone through some various expansions in subsequent years. But they only started making Four Roses again much later. But you know what we really owe to Four Roses, like for that new legacy of Four Roses, is a really premium product is their former master distiller Jim Rutledge, who is now doing his own distillery, the Rutledge Distillery. And now because he really, I mean, he built the brand for 20 years from 1995 to 2015. And then now Brent Elliott is at the helm and, you know, continuing to do great stuff. But the one thing I will say about Four Roses is that if you like bullet bourbon, you will like Four Roses because bullet bourbon was sourced from Four Roses for a very long time.
I did not know that. That's fascinating.
It says Lawrenceburg, Kentucky on the bottom and Lawrenceburg, Indiana on their rye. So they pulled from MGP as well as from Four Roses. And now they have their own distillery over in Louisville. So
beautiful. So on the palate, well, what do you primarily get on this? I mean, to me, it certainly comes out as a high rye bourbon or high rye bourbon.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I get some of those kind of minty qualities, if you will, a little bit of that zing, because I think a lot of times people will associate mint with wheat. I'm sorry, not with sweet. I'm sorry, not wheat, with sweet, because, you know, they're like, oh, it's mint, so like a mint julep or like mint gum. But mint is also kind of that freshness, kind of like that when you kind of like blow, if you have some gum and then you like blow air out, it's like cooling almost.
Yeah. I get a little bit more, and not in a bad way, but a little bit more bitterness and body on the Four Roses single barrel than I do on the Elijah Craig for sure.
Yeah, I think that's more of kind of like on the butterscotch side, if you will, like a little bit more kind of roundness and a little bit more depth. So, and yeah, I think a lot of that is contributed to or from the rye.
And I could similarly like and when I say bitterness, I don't mean like gentian bitterness. I mean like chicory or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think a lot of people also like to associate the word bitter with bad. But bitter is such an important taste receptor and such an important part of a really well-developed flavor. So. Yeah,
true dat. Yeah, so the nice thing about Four Roses single barrel to me is that it makes you... It doesn't make you, but it certainly, I find, encourages you to sip slowly in a different way than what I was describing with the Elijah Craig a few moments ago. To me, this encourages you to sip a little bit more slowly, because it's a little bit higher proof, so maybe it encourages a rock, whereas you might just want to do the Elijah Craig neat, but it also encourages you to sip more slowly in that it warms differently and it sticks around on your palate in a different way. I find that as you experience the finish, you get some almost some more desserty notes, but also a little bit of white pepper, and it's really, really pleasant to me. Really pleasant.
And it warms in the kind of like upper back half of your palate rather than like the lower front half.
And that to me that's a little bit more. It's less urgent, if that makes sense.
Right, it's that slow burn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very. This is like this is a winter bourbon for me. Whereas like Elijah Craig's almost more of like a spring fall.
Yeah, no, that's. I mean, listen, I'm gonna be honest. Like sometimes people are like, I drink bourbon in the wintertime because it's cold. Yes, you can always have an alcohol coat or a whiskey coat. But for me, whiskey is something you can have all year long. But yeah, no, I absolutely get how kind of those deeper spice notes. But think about like when you would drink something like mulled wine or a hot toddy, things that have those spices to them, those warming spices, versus that kind of lighter mash bill where it doesn't have as much spice from the rye.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we've got your classic mash bill, we've got your high rye mash bill, and now we're going to take a quick moment to thank our first sponsor. Guys, we have a sponsor. So for those of you joining us on YouTube and Facebook Live and all of the horizontal video formats, you're going to see a really nice screen overlay right now for Near Country Provisions. And Near Country Provisions is basically a CSA for your local farm-to-table meats. And I was reached out to by Adam from Near Country Provisions, who actually he and I met at an event called Emporium that DC folks might remember.
Emporium, right?
Emporium.
Yeah.
Held
Yum.
at Union Market in the before days when we could actually be together. But Adam has teamed up with a bunch of amazing local farmers. So first caveat is that this is sort of local to the DMV region. They do have some resources for you. If you reach out to us, I can put you in touch with resources if you're not in the DC region. But for those folks joining us here in the DMV area, this is the sort of thing where you basically you go to nearcountry.com and you can select any number of packages. You can get just pork, just beef, or a combination. You can get any number of pounds delivered. You can do cool add-ons, and they're also about to launch chicken, and they've already launched seafood. So this is a really cool local initiative. Like the seafood is all local too. It's, so we get the rockfish or striped bass for those of us who aren't from around here. But yeah, so I've been testing this out with our friend Ethan in the booth for the past couple months, and I've done some really fun stuff. I took some of the beef that they used, and I threw it in the sous vide, got it right to medium rare, and then sliced it super thin because I made some homemade pho, and I just took this beautiful farm fresh beef and was able to put that right over my pho, and it was like this beautiful touch. Also, something that you'll notice if you do partner up with Near Country for your meat needs, their meat is darker, and you really see the influence of this, pasture raised meat, and the quality is something that I couldn't be happier with, because I was the sort of person who did a CSA, and with my vegetables also subscribed to like the meat from the big CSAs around here, and we would get something like 2 pork chops. And I'm like, what the hell do you do with 2 pork chops? Whereas with Near Country, they focus on meat, so you get actual reasonable quantities of these things. And it's great. It's been amazing to play around with. They have great cuts, and they just drop it off right at your door on ice. You just leave your bag out from the previous delivery. They grab that, and then away you go. You've got your meat for the month. And I even tried to throw them a curveball this time. I threw in a 6-pound brisket as a little add-on, and it didn't trip them up. So Ethan, what have you been making with your Near Country Provisions meat supply from this past month?
Yeah, so I've been going in on the breakfast meats pretty hard these last few weekends, and they're wonderful. So the Near Country breakfast sausage was phenomenal. Came with it's unlike your Jimmy Dean maple flavored sausage. It is made with real maple sugar. Delicious as a side with some hash browns and eggs, some pancakes, and what's even better is while they're not formed into patties or links, the way that Near Country pays attention to detail and puts the butcher paper in between layers is you get these big, wide, my friends from Pennsylvania Dutch Country will say it reminds you of slices of scrapple, but it tastes way, are we a family show? Way stinking better. And then you got their bacon. It is your traditional thick cut, super premium bacon, but this stuff is smoky as all get out, has a phenomenal taste for something that is uncured in that traditional sense. A lot of the other places will try to use weird additives, so kind of defeats the purpose of an uncured meat if you're gonna add stuff that shouldn't be in a cured meat or uncured meat. This stuff, fantastic. I'm not actually gonna speak ill of their competition because I'm only going to be eating this bacon going forward. Saved some of the bacon raw from my breakfast, cut it into lardones, added that to my mussels that I made for Valentine's Day dinner. Phenomenal. Perfumed that broth and made those things shine. Yeah, keep them meats coming, Near Country. Should I switch this over to the code?
Yeah, please. So the cool thing that we have to offer all of our viewers and listeners right now is that we have a nice little thank you from Near Country to all of our listeners. If you go to nearcountry.com and you sign up for one of their packages, you can use the code BARCART, all one word, at checkout to get 2 free pounds of bacon or ground beef. You choose, and it just comes as a little thank you for being a part of the modern Bar Cart community. So again, at checkout, that's BARCART, all one word. It doesn't apply to trials, which you can also do. If you just want to kind of give them a little test, you can do a little trial, but that doesn't count for our little code. So if you do end up going all in and using Near Country for your farm to doorstep meats, then use that code at checkout and select whether you'd like 2 pounds of free bacon, which Ethan just described, or 2 pounds of free ground beef. All right, let's get back to the bourbon.
I know, it's funny because so I'm a pescatarian, so I'm just like thinking about like, oh yeah, I can't eat that. But then when you said they have seafood, I was like, oh, okay, well maybe I need to check that out.
They do.
And I will say though is that, you know, a lot of times people think that bourbon and steak, right? Like I always say, think about Ron Swanson when you're talking about pairing with whiskey. What is Ron Swanson like more in the world besides woodworking and not government? Mm-hmm. Whiskey and meat, right? And of course, you know, meat goes really well with bourbon and whiskey in general because of the various type of flavors, and the oils in the bourbon really help to cut through some of that deep fattiness and even the salinity. The sweetness and the salinity go really well together to make this really beautiful marriage. But I feel like a lot of times folks are like, it only goes with meat, but it actually goes really well with seafood too. Especially some of the sweeter stuff like shrimp or lobster even. And so there's so many ways that you can actually pair whiskey with food that I think folks maybe wouldn't even think about. So
yeah, typically it's going to be like your after dinner drink, but yeah, start playing around. When I think bourbon, I think like maple glazed ham.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. I normally think of like, you know, like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, you know, having like a big thing of whiskey and bourbon with my big old, you know, like butter sizzling filet. So,
I mean, I wouldn't turn that down either.
I mean, yeah, listen, you know, I haven't always been this way.
So take us to our next bourbon.
Yeah, so this one is Rebel Bourbon. So it's funny because I always was like, why is it still Rebel Yell? I was like, haven't we gotten away from this? But Rebel Yell is like an old school, it's an old a brand that Luxco brought back. Luxco was actually recently acquired like 3 weeks ago or something by MGP. They used to source most of their whiskeys from Heaven Hill, so which we've already touched on. So a lot of these started in the same place. But the difference between the Rebel Bourbon and the rest of these is that it is a wheated mash bill. So most of the wheated mash bills you are probably accustomed to are Maker's Mark. I certainly could have chosen that one, but I wanted to choose something that maybe folks don't think about. Larceny is also out of Heaven Hill, but I didn't want to pull in something also from Heaven Hill.
Right.
Even though very technically it's from Heaven Hill, but you know. And then finally, the one that all y'all probably have heard about is Weller and Pappy Van Winkle. Those are also wheated mash bills. And so Rebel Yell actually started, it was a brand created by the Stitzel Weller company way back in the Wayback Machine. And then it was sold off in 19 1972, I believe. And so Luxco's only been around for about 40 years, but they make this as well as Davies County, Ezra Brooks. And so the thing that I really get off the nose on this one, and so the mash bill here is 68% corn, 20% wheat, and then 12% malted barley. And so that one of the things about that too is that the malted barley is much higher than the ones that we've had in the other two. So that will give a little bit more kind of that graininess to it as well. So because malted barley is what's usually used in Scotch, for example. So that's used to also temper kind of that sweetness and softness of the wheat. But on the nose, I get a lot of grass.
I like, wheat is a grass. Interesting.
It is a grass, but
so is corn.
Kind of that freshness, sort of that fresh. Corn is a grass? I didn't know that.
It is.
I guess it's like a, big seeded grass. Things you learn.
I get that. Like, wet, like grass after a nice rain.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
That's fun. This is fun to smell.
It is.
I would say this is probably the most fun to smell. And one of the things that I sometimes come across in wheated bourbons is if you take too big of a sniff, like if you get real ambitious and get right in there, sometimes you can get a little bit more than you reckoned for on the nose.
That octane. I like to call it singeing my nose hairs.
Yeah.
So you don't need a trimmer. You just need some really good high proof bourbon.
But this is nice. This has had plenty of time to open up, and it's real. This is really pleasant to smell. I mean, there's something I would say. The different, again, we're going to coming back to this idea again, but differently comforting about a wheated bourbon than something that's a high rye. This is, to me, the friendly, outgoing person here in this lineup.
Yeah, and so this one is, this particular bottling is 100 proof, so 50% alcohol by volume. It's also a straight bourbon, so it doesn't have an age statement, but it's going to be at least 2 years old. So straight means at least 2 years old. If you see bottled and bond, that's going to mean 4 years old, and we'll get into that with our last one, which is bottled and bond. Yep. But for this one, it's a lot of times folks think that if there's wheat in your bourbon, it's full of gluten. But actually, so this is something I talk about a lot in my cocktail classes too, is that so with the distillation process, all of that protein that is gluten just gets completely decimated. So the only way there's going to be gluten in a distilled product, that's not saying liqueurs, because there could be other things added, right? Is if literally wheat dust settled into the bottle before they poured the whiskey in there. So even if it's a wheated bourbon, it is gluten free. So.
But Tito's is gluten free, like they say so.
They are the most genius marketing folks on the planet. All vodka is gluten free. I was like, can I say this closer? All vodka is gluten free, as is all rum, tequila, whiskey, etc. Gin.
It's funny because I had somebody who actually worked at a liquor store, fairly prominent and well-known liquor store here in DC, say that they can't drink bourbon because of a gluten sensitivity. Oh no, I can tell.
I mean, listen, sometimes there are people who could have a reaction, but also that doesn't mean necessarily that it's a gluten reaction. Yeah. It could just be another type of reaction. Also, if it's a craft producer, for example, there could be less, control over if little bits of dust settle in there that do contain gluten. Also, the other way you can get gluten in whiskey is by flavorings and additives. But if you are drinking bourbon that is regulated by the United States government, by the FDA, by the TTB, all of these folks, and so they literally can't have any artificial additives in order for it to be labeled as bourbon. So there you go. The more you know. Exactly.
So the thing that I love about this is that it really does not hit you like a 100 proof product.
No. It does. So Rebel Bourbon comes in 100 proof and 80 proof. I brought the 100 proof because
of course you did.
It's me. I was like, I don't even own a bottle of Basil Hayden because I don't drink anything under 90 proof really. But yeah, it really does not drink to its proof.
No.
So be careful.
Yes. Seatbelts on. Yes. Drink water between.
Hydrate.
Yep.
Hydration is the most important part of dehydration. So.
Yep. But yeah, it's. Just what an approachable product, especially for the proof. And I mean, sometimes when we're tasting too, I think it's useful to consider value. right? Bang for your buck in certain respects. There's not just one definition of value. I mean, it depends on who you are and what you're looking for in terms of how we can define value. But for me, the value of this is that, it is, by the sheer fact that it is 100 proof, it brings a certain amount of gravity and sophistication to the table, because if you don't have a somewhat sophisticated product, you have no right to be bottling it at 100 proof. You're going to want to water that down right to where it's legal, so that people can, let the water erase some of maybe the flaws or lack of sophistication. But you've got a sophistication sort of built into this by the sheer fact that it's 100 proof. And then you taste it and you're like, wow.
You would have no idea.
How nice.
Well, and there's also whiskeys out there that are below 90 proof that drink like they're higher, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
No.
So let me just put it this way: is that if there is a high proof that drinks lower, that's good. That's a quality marker, right? If there is a low that feels like it drinks high, that means it's probably crap. Because that means it's not aged very long. It's not well blended. A lot of your bottom shelf bombs, if you will drink higher proof. That's where they'll kind of oh my gosh, what did I just drink? I drank gasoline.
Yeah, it feels like you got punched in the chest.
Yeah,
and now I'll caveat this by saying that I work with a lot of craft distillers. I love craft distillers. I love craft distilling. I think it's a super, super important part of the American landscape.
Yep.
And if you put a gun to my head, I'm going over to the craft guys. That said, when you drink whiskey from a lot of bourbon or other types of whiskey from a lot of craft distillers, this is where you're bound to encounter that. And maybe they will try to explain it away by saying oh, it's very peppery. Or so this is something just to be on the lookout when you're dealing with these craft distillers. They're still figuring it out, and that's okay. It's okay for them to be figuring it out, but it's also okay for you not to spend $70 on a bottle that you don't like, and then just go to the liquor store on your way home and pick up something like this.
Well, that's also, time is the most expensive ingredient, right?
Totally.
And you can't control for it. All of this hyper-aging stuff is gimmicky AF. I'm sorry, but you can't throw some wood chips in and expect it to taste like something like a Four Roses or an Elijah Craig. You can't do it. We could argue about that for a long time, I'm sure, with some people, but I really am not for the gimmicks. It's just let it go. Don't force it. Let time do its thing. This is a proven process, but it does take time and patience. And I understand that places have a bottom line to hit. So that's why I always really like to, especially with craft producers, I like to patronize their products that aren't aged. So gin, vodka, liqueurs, rum in some cases, agave spirits, etc. So so it's definitely an expectation that should be tempered.
Yeah.
But going back to your value conversation too, so Elijah Craig is about $25 MSRP. Four Roses single barrel is about 40. The Rebel Bourbon is between $20 really, $25. And then once we get to the Wild Turkey, that's really kind of the heavy hitter as far as your wallet and age go. But that's for a reason, right?
Yes.
But value is something I also really like to talk about. First off, drink what you like, drink whatever you want, but do drink curious. That's our mantra at Bourbon Banter. Hashtag drink curious. That makes me feel really old when I say that. Hashtag. I'm not even on TikTok. I can't figure it out. So
you have to know how to dance, I think.
I do, but very poorly. I'm like a Liz Lemon dancer.
Oh, yeah.
Working on my night cheese. So, but when it comes to value, though, you also have to think about, a lot of bourbons out there. Someone asked me actually last night, Erin, what do you think about Sweetens Cove, Peyton Manning's bourbon? Well, that is a source bourbon that is overpriced so badly, and I've never had it because I don't care about Peyton Manning, and also it's all branding.
Does it come with head trauma?
I'm sure. Well, it comes from head trauma if you're willing to pay, I think it's $350 a bottle or something. So you must have experienced some head trauma if you bought a bottle. Sorry, Marianne Barnes, but
sorry, Peyton.
Sorry, girl. Sorry, guy. But no. So for example, I even saw this thing on sale the other day. They were importing it from France. They wanted to charge €50 plus €40 shipping for a regular Buffalo Trace bottle with a fancy cardboard tube. It was regular Buffalo Trace, but it cost you 90 euros to get shipped to your house here in the U.S. For just regular Buffalo Trace, which is $20 MSRP. So just be wary as a consumer. A lot of bourbon has a lot of storytelling, marketing, and branding. So always start. I don't necessarily say a bottom shelf, but start with what you could afford. Don't think that you need to go out in the secondary market and spend $200 for Weller Special Reserve, which should be selling for like $20 for a 175 for a wheated bourbon, when you can try other wheated bourbons that are readily available at MSRP, such as the Rebel Bourbon from Luxco. Maker's Mark is an excellent one. Larceny from Heavenly Hill.
That's my favorite, yeah.
And so it's funny though, because like Larceny doesn't hit with me. Makers are my folks. So again, palates are always different. So start understanding what you like. And the reason why I wanted to talk about the various mash bills first was because, once you understand the type of mash bill you like, then that can start guiding you into what other things to try.
Exactly. And I think, you were saying drink curiously. Well, part of drinking curiously is being informed. And so if you know the mash bill that you like, when you can walk up to a bottle you can do a little research on and understand that has a mash bill that's different from what you normally like. Even if you don't end up liking that bottle, maybe you can understand why, and that's a data point for you. That's something that's an arrow in your quiver going forward. Absolutely. So that's important. But yeah, on the finish for me, this is like nice, and it's like honey and apple.
Yep.
Or honey crisp apple, or it's just so pleasant, so easy, and I truly love it. So
yeah, those are those soft wheat notes. And I usually ask folks to try this whenever I do private bourbon tastings, because everyone's had Maker's Mark and people usually have preconceived notions about it, right? Even though I do think it's an exceptional product. My fiance and he actually told me on our first date, he said Maker's Mark and Veuve Clicquot are the Coca-Cola of their their respective industries, in the sense that it's the same thing. Everywhere you go, you always know it's going to be good. You know what to expect. It's kind of the, poster child for the category, if you will, broadly. And it's, it's not priced too crazy. It's not a low dollar product. It's not a super premium product, but it's kind of in the middle.
Yep, you know exactly what you're getting. I don't know, there's something about Maker's Mark that always tastes a little waxy to me.
Yeah, that's fair. And I actually get a little wax on this, but I think that, so for me, a lot of rye whiskeys will taste a little waxy to me. This one tastes slightly waxy to me. But I get what you're saying, but I feel like one of the things, if you do like wheated bourbons and maybe you don't like Maker's itself, try some of their finishing series, their private selection, because that's a great way to learn how wood really plays with the flavor profiles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wasn't serious. That was just a wax joke, because they dipped the bottle. But
I missed it, but it actually does. Like, this one actually does have a slight waxy taste to me.
It does.
Well, by the way, though, you can thank Margie Samuels, who's the matriarch of the Samuels family, for that whole branding process. She's incredible. So if you guys have some time, look up Margie Samuels. She is a pioneer, and she is the mastermind behind the Maker's Mark brand.
Beautiful. So I think it is that time for us to come to this this very, very special final.
I'm going to cleanse my palate here. So this one is near and dear to my heart for so many reasons. Once again, I grew up in Lawrenceburg in Anderson County, in the same county as Wild Turkey. Eddie Russell and Jimmy Russell are the two, first off, the nicest humans. Jim Rutledge is also an extremely nice human, but all three of those guys, actually, all the master distillers in Lawrenceburg are the nicest people in the world, and they know their bourbon. And so, Jimmy and Eddie do a wonderful job. I mean, granted, Jimmy is like in his 80s now, and so he's not the master distiller anymore. Eddie took over for him in 2015. Mm-hmm. But the Master's Keep is a series that came out to really kind of, play with that ultra premium market. The first one that they had in that kind of vein was Kentucky Spirit, which is the coolest because it has this like turkey fan bottle. Oh yeah. It's beautiful. But this particular Master's Keep is a bottled and bond 17-year, 100 proof.
It's almost old enough to drink itself.
I know, right? So this was actually, I believe, done out of the Camp Nelson warehouse. And so there's this whole thing about warehousing, which I guess you could get into about like terroir or whatever with bourbon, but I feel like my brain just can't handle that. Half the time I'm like, I really can't. Some people do, especially with Elijah Craig. They have a lot of different warehouses. So people will have, affinities or loyalties to various warehouses. But this one was from the Camp Nelson warehouse. The other one is Tyrone warehouses, which is actually on property at Wild Turkey, whereas Nelson is in Jessamine County. This one does retail for $175. You might not be able to find it anymore on the shelves. There were about 15,000 bottles. I actually think it was 14,400. But it's a truly... I feel like it's a remarkable bourbon for its age. If anyone has ever had Pappy 23 or other hyper-aged bourbons, they can sometimes taste like you just had a sip of bourbon and then threw a bunch of like wood chips in your mouth and started chewing on them. Mm-hmm. But this one I feel like really is more measured with the oak. In the sense that it doesn't just taste like I put charcoal in my glass.
Mm-hmm. The nose is sort of cedary to me. It's got
absolutely.
some. I mean, you kind of get the fact that it's different right away without even having to taste it.
And it's a fun bourbon. And the reason why I threw this in here, and I know that, folks watching along probably won't have access to this one in particular, but look for something that's maybe a little bit different, something that is longer aged. You don't necessarily have to, sell a kidney for it because there's so many options out there. But understanding how the extended aging process really does impact the flavor, I think, is important because then you can understand the difference between a straight bourbon, which is 2 years, bottle and bond, which is a minimum of 4, and then ones that actually do have an age statement like this one.
Mm-hmm. If you could go back in time and like talk to people, 200-300 years ago who were first making bourbon, mm-hmm. like, can you imagine the conversation that you'd have? You'd be like, all right, so listen. In a couple hundred years, this stuff's still going to be around. Mm-hmm. And people are going to be all about it. And they're going to be so into it that you're going to have a bunch of warehouses and they're going to track down which one you keep it in. And if it's in this one, they're going to love it. But if it's in that warehouse,
it's fine.
They're not going to want it.
I feel like more than anything is that whiskey in this country, and let me throw in my kind of like history professor hat here. The reason why bourbon is America's native spirit is because it's so nice, right?
Wow.
Isn't it crazy?
That's not bourbon.
Right?
It is, but it's not.
It's not. It's such a fun flavor.
Ethan, what are you getting?
I was about to say, like, what's
Hold
Ethan
on.
think?
We'll get back to Professor Erin.
I
Ethan,
know.
what is the flavor that I'm getting that I can't communicate? Is it pear?
Say again.
What's the flavor that I can't communicate? Is it pear?
1 second. Let me flip the camera and give us a little sniff.
It's very fruity.
It's very fruity, yeah.
Which is not what you'd expect at all.
Mm-mm. You definitely do get some of the charcoal on the front of the palate, right? So that's what you're going to get with a hyper-aged bourbon, is you will get a little bit more oak, but you get you're not really getting that caramel sweetness. You're getting more like mocha. Like think of like a little bit of like coffee bean as well as like cocoa nibs.
This tastes like Armagnac.
There you go.
This is ridiculous.
This is where we get into
or even like Applejack even. Like, like an aged, like a Laird's 12 even.
This does not taste like it is made of corn.
Right? It's so fun.
It's our super premium conundrum that we had with the rums where they start tasting like other things and not in an insulting way. It's like the rum tasting like scotch. This is the bourbon that tastes like really good brandy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're picking up. It's not pear. You're picking up all the flavors of the brandy.
I almost get I don't want to say this, but it tastes like almond too. I definitely get kind of that almond flavor. Not marzipan.
I don't know. I don't know though.
Like almost
I think this would be a positive use case for marzipan. Just putting it out there.
I know, but I just can't. My heart hurts. No, but yeah, so I definitely get kind of that almond, not like necessarily like orgeat almond, but like really nice, like just raw almonds, not toasted almonds, but raw almonds.
Mm-hmm.
like almond extract even.
Yeah. Almond, I can get the extra. It's very intense. It's very powerful.
Yep.
It's powerful but sophisticated.
This doesn't taste like it's 100 proof, I don't think.
I mean, this doesn't. This is baffling to me.
Right?
And
it's so fun.
I mean, the price tag is totally worth it. I mean, for anybody out there who's saying they're like, oh my God, this is special.
Yeah.
Like this glass is going to be dry.
Yeah.
For sure. So, all right. This is an interesting thing I think to talk about here would be like, how do you evaluate or think about a bourbon when it doesn't taste like a bourbon in this case? Like what's the mental process that you go through when you taste this?
I mean, again, I have real appreciation for where I'm from, and the impact of the environment as well as the palate of the master distiller. Because number one, the environment is the major contributing factor to whether the barrels that were created and filled that ended up being this particular BIB product versus, maybe some of those were also dumped to be 101. They could have been dumped earlier to be 101, but these ones were special. And the reason they were special is because of the various type of makeup from the barrels, the interaction with the environment. I don't know why Jessamine County is so special. Most folks, like, the best things in Jessamine County, Kentucky are the boot store and Camp Nelson warehouses. Not hating on anybody from Nicholasville, just saying. But, it's the fact that something can be so different because of how it has aged and literally breathed in and out of those staves. Because the staves in a barrel are like lungs. They breathe in, they breathe out. And so when the white dog or the actual corn mash is put into a barrel with these seasons, especially in Kentucky, that's why Kentucky does so well with bourbon, is because of the rapid change in temperatures versus the summer versus the winter. That's why I really don't love Texas whiskeys, because they have a pretty standard weather pattern up until last week.
Yeah.
And so, the other reason why Kentucky, was really popular with bourbon production is because, folks were literally said, like, hey, you plant 40 acres of corn, which was a crop native to the Americas. If you plant 40 acres of corn, you can have X amount of land. Just like, Jamie Fraser and Outlander. They were like, the governor was like, you can have all of this land if you recruit so many people to settle there and you make so many things of crops. It's the same thing with bourbon. No, but really, it had everything to do with politics. The reason why we in this country have a palate for bourbon is because in, I can't remember, if it was 1806 or 1807, the British put a blockade against the United States and against the Caribbean and France because of Napoleon. And so we couldn't drink the brandy and the cognac we liked so much, so we started getting into our own stash, and that stuck. And so it's all of these geopolitics that actually led us to having such a unique product and having such a palate for it. And now recently it's really taken, the United States as well as the world by storm. But it all has to do with our unique geography, the weather patterns, because you can take the exact same mash bill. Wild Turkey has 2 mash bills. One is bourbon, one is rye. That's it. So literally the exact same recipe was used to make that 101 versus this right here. So I think that's crazy. Yeah,
it's something. Yeah, it's a miracle. Like going back to like what we were talking about earlier. It's science, but it's also a miracle, right? And when I taste something like this, where there's so much going on, right? It's smoky. It's a little bit cedary to me, like you get some of that mentholation, but then you also get this burst of fruit that like, no offense to these other folks over here, but the fruit in this is like more than any of all of these combined in here. And it's fresh. It's like biting into maybe not a peach, but like the equivalent of biting into a juicy peach, just the intensity of it. And then you've got this crazy finish where it's like all of these things kind of warp through different iterations of what they were when you first took it into your mouth. So it's incredibly compelling, and like it's it's almost, I think drinking something that's A, this old, and B, had so much care put into the making of it is, no offense to anybody, but sort of a religious experience for me. Like, not to say that the other types aren't good and valid, but this to me is a religious experience because there is something about that. There's something numinous about this. There's something mysterious, but also loving and compelling about it.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, my middle name is Russell. The Russells are the master distillers at Wild Turkey. We still need to figure out if we're related. I don't know really if we are.
One of our co-founders is Russell also, but that's his first name.
Yeah, well, ours was a family last name, so we actually had a dry goods grocer for a long time in the family, MC Russell, who actually also sold a lot of bourbon.
Did he spin records? Did he spin records? He
did not. MC Russell, no. It was Milton Culbertson. The whitest name on the planet. But no, I don't know why I feel such an affinity for Wild Turkey. Maybe it is because I'm from there and I know the guys, but it's also because I feel like with their product, I always just get a different experience. 101 is an excellent product. Rare Breed's a wonderful product. Kentucky Spirit. And all day, every day, Russell's Reserve is on the shelf, and it is one of, my absolute favorite products out there. So I think that Wild Turkey sometimes gets a rap for being like, I don't know, old man bourbon or like redneck cheap bourbon. But I think now they're getting their day in the sun as a truly exceptional brand. I mean, granted, they were acquired a couple of years ago by Campari. I really don't. Yeah. I mean, I don't give Matthew McConaughey any credit for anything they're doing. But I just really think that this is the result of people doing for decades, what they're good at and what they know and they love. And I feel like this is an excellent example of, the mash bill is very important, but it's also has everything to do with the palates of the people in charge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Thank you so much for sharing not only the first 3 bottles, but especially this very, very beautiful Wild Turkey 17-year with us. Erin, is there anything that you would ask of our listeners if in the bourbon space or in terms of like contact info you want to drop so that people can keep in touch with you and maybe join some of the cocktail classes that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram at ERPDC, Erin Russell Petrey, District of Columbia. You can also find me at bourbonbanter.com. Also, be sure to give us a follow on all of the social media platforms, Bourbon Banter. And then also, you can also message me on Instagram, or you can catch me on email, erin.petrey, Petrey, @gmail.com, for custom cocktail classes as well as custom whiskey tasting experiences where I will go very in depth into all of the mash bills as well as show you how to taste, pair with food. I go even more in depth into the history of each brand and kind of the history of everything. I actually teach a class called History of the World Through Booze as well, because it's funny how much our today landscape has been shaped by alcohol and the distillation process. But yeah, thank you so much for having me here, Eric. And always, I love using your bitters as well in all of my bourbon cocktails. They're beautiful.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thanks so much for being here. We got to get you out of here because you're actually off to go teach a class tonight. So this is serious. To anybody who enjoyed Erin today on the live stream or on the podcast that'll be coming out soon, definitely hit her up because she does a lot of classes, and this is the perfect sort of thing if you are in the doldrums right now and you have to put together a happy hour for your company or something like that. This is the absolute perfect thing. She is an absolute wizard, and we are so lucky to have her. So Erin, thanks again. And for everybody listening, you can check this out over on the show notes page over at modernbarcart.com/podcast. And eventually, when I get my act together, it's going to be on our YouTube channel as well. Hopefully, we've got sound this time. Ethan, thanks for being here, bud.
Code BARCART at nearcountryprovisions.com.
Awesome. Yeah, hit up Near Country. Cheers.